There is a place where volcanoes explode ice into steam in seconds, where killer whales hunt in narrow bays, while the earth shakes from active volcanoes. A land larger than Japan that almost nobody knows exists. This isn't Africa or the Amazon. This is somewhere far more dangerous, more alien, more alive. Welcome to Kamchatka. Russia's final frontier. And here, you are no longer at the top of the food chain. Where exactly is Kamchatka? Imagine looking at a map of Russia. Your eyes travel east, past Moscow, past Siberia, all the way to the edge of the continent. And there, jutting out into the Pacific Ocean like a dagger pointing south, you'll find it. The Kamchatka Peninsula. This place is massive. We're talking about an area larger than the entire country of Japan. More than 100,000 square miles of mountains, volcanoes, rivers, and coastline. And yet, if you ask 100 people on the street where Kamchatka is, maybe 2 could point to it on a map. Why? Because getting here is nearly impossible. There are no roads connecting Kamchatka to mainland Russia. None. If you want to visit, you have exactly 2 options. You fly in, or you arrive by sea. That's it. No trains, no highways, no convenient road trips. This isolation has shaped everything about this place, from its wildlife, to its people, to its very landscape. If you love exploring the most extreme and untouched places on Earth, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps us to reach more people. Now, here's where things get interesting. Kamchatka sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire. You know what that means? Volcanoes. Earthquakes, geothermal activity on a scale that's hard to imagine. The Earth's crust is thin here, and what lies beneath is constantly pushing upward, reshaping the land in real time. Some people call Kamchatka the Iceland of Asia. But that comparison doesn't do it justice. Iceland has tourists. Iceland has infrastructure. Iceland has been tamed, at least to some degree. Kamchatka. Kamchatka is wilder, harsher, more ancient. This is what the Earth looked like before humans tried to control it. The weather here swings between extremes. Winters are brutal, with temperatures dropping far below freezing and snow piling up for months. Summers are short but intense, with the landscape exploding into life as plants and animals rush to make the most of the brief warmth. And through it all, the volcanoes keep watching, silent guardians of a land that refuses to be conquered. The people who actually live here. Because yes, people do live in Kamchatka, and their main settlement is a city that seems almost impossible. PETROPAVLOVSK-KAMCHATSKY. Try saying that 5 times fast. This city is home to about 181,000 people. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 200,000 human beings living in one of the most isolated places on the planet. No roads in or out. Everything arrives by air or by sea. Food, supplies, fuel, everything. It's like living on an island, except the island is attached to the largest country on Earth. The city sits in the southeastern corner of the peninsula, tucked into a natural bowl surrounded by mountains. And not just any mountains. 3 massive volcanoes rise up around the city like ancient sentinels. Koryakski, Avachinsky, and KOASTLINE. On a clear day, you can see all three from the city center, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the sunlight. Living in the shadow of active volcanoes might sound terrifying to outsiders, but for the people here, it's just normal life. The history of this place goes back centuries. In the 1740s, a Danish explorer named Vitus Bering arrived in these waters. He was working for the Russian Empire, mapping the far eastern edges of the known world. Bering established an outpost here, and that small settlement eventually grew into the city we see today. Many of the place names in the region still carry his legacy, but the people of PETROPAVLOVSK-KAMCHATSKY aren't just defined by their location, they're defined by their resilience. During the Crimean War in the mid-1800s, a powerful enemy fleet attacked the city. The defenders? A small group of hunters and fishermen. They refused to surrender. They held their ground, and they won. That moment became a source of fierce local pride, a reminder that the people here are as tough as the land itself. From above, the city looks almost surreal. Buildings clustered together in the valley, smoke rising from chimneys, and beyond it all, those three volcanoes standing watch. Steam drifts from distant volcanic vents, mixing with sea fog rolling in from the bay. It's a place where the ordinary and the extraordinary exist side by side. And speaking of the bay, let's move closer to the water. Step down to the waterfront, and you'll find yourself standing at the edge of AVACHA Bay. This is the lifeline of PETROPAVLOVSK-KAMCHATSKY. Without this bay, the city wouldn't exist. AVACHA Bay is enormous. It's one of the largest natural harbors in the world, deep enough to shelter ships even during the most violent Pacific storms. For generations, this bay has been the connection between Kamchatka and the rest of the world. Ships arrive here carrying supplies. Fishing boats head out into the open ocean and return with their catch. Families gather on the piers, watching the water, living their lives in rhythm with the tides. But AVACHA Bay isn't just a working harbor, it's also home to some remarkable wildlife. If you're lucky, you might see humpback whales passing through. These massive creatures follow seasonal migration routes that bring them close to shore. You'll hear them before you see them. A deep, resonant breath, and then, rising from the water, a towering white plume of mist. They're here to feed, taking advantage of the rich waters that surround Kamchatka. Harbor seals also make an appearance. They drift near the rocks, occasionally lifting their heads to watch the boats go by. For the people who live here, these animals aren't a spectacle. They're just part of the environment. It's a strange and beautiful overlap, a working port where humans and wildlife share the same space, each going about their business. As the afternoon light begins to soften, the activity on the water shifts. Fishing boats trace their way back toward the docks. Out in the deeper water, the curved backs of whales rise and fall. And near the mouth of the bay, something else catches your eye. 3 tall rock pillars standing in the water. The locals call them the Three Brothers. These stone formations have been shaped by centuries of storms and tides. Their surfaces are rough and weathered, catching the fading sunlight and turning from grey to amber as the day winds down. Seabirds weave between them, using the rocks as shelter before heading back out to sea. The combination of working harbour, wildlife, and stark natural beauty creates a scene that's hard to find anywhere else. It's functional and wild at the same time, and it sets the tone for for everything that lies beyond. Following the water upstream, away from the bay, we come to the AVACHA River. This river spreads out into a wide floodplain as it approaches the coast. From above, it looks like a living, breathing network. The main channel divides and reconnects in long, winding loops. It cuts through marshes and soft, waterlogged ground, creating a landscape that shifts with the seasons. Wetlands stretch out on both sides. Grasses and reeds grow thick in some areas, sparse in others. Small ponds form between the loops, their surfaces calm and still, broken only by passing birds or the occasional ripple of wind. The water here moves slowly, almost lazily, giving sediment time to settle. The floodplain acts like a giant filter, processing everything that flows downstream from the interior valleys. Wildlife uses this area as a transition zone. Waterfowl gather in the quieter pools. Fox tracks appear along the firmer edges. The river maintains a steady rhythm, powerful enough to shape its path, but slow enough to create pockets of stillness that stretch for hundreds of yards. As the floodplain widens, the curves begin to straighten. The vegetation thins. The river completes its final bends before meeting the tidal influence of the Pacific. Those last calm stretches of fresh water hold their shape briefly, then merge with the stronger currents that define the coast ahead. And speaking of the coast, our next stop takes us to a beach unlike any you've probably seen before. The shoreline changes here. The sand beneath your feet turns a deep, volcanic black. It stretches out in a long, unbroken sweep, and the color comes from ash and shattered lava that settled here over thousands of years. This is KHALAKTYRSKY Beach, and it's stunning. Each wave rolls in with a cold, heavy weight. White foam spreads across the dark surface, creating a stark contrast that's almost hypnotic. Then the wave pulls back, and the black sand reappears, wet and gleaming. The Pacific feels especially raw here. Its rhythm is steady but forceful, carrying a chill that lingers even in midsummer. Farther along the coast, the wind pushes low mist across the beach. The combination of black sand, bright surf, and drifting haze gives this place a look that's rare and unforgettable. And here's the surprising part. Despite the cold, locals arrive with surfboards. They read the water with practiced ease, moving through the waves without hesitation. Their presence tells you something important about this coast. It's harsh, yes, but its clarity and openness draw people back. There's something about the simplicity of this place, the raw honesty of it, that makes it unforgettable. But the black sand is just the beginning. If you want to see where that volcanic material really comes from, we need to head inland. We need to go to the source. The first thing you notice is the sound. A low, steady rumble, steam rising from vents scattered across the slopes, creating bursts of vapor that drift upward and disappear into the wind. Welcome to MUTNOVSKY volcano. This is an active geothermal site, and it's one of the most dramatic landscapes in Kamchatka. Snowfields cut through the terrain in irregular shapes. The contrast between white ice and dark, exposed stone becomes sharper as you climb higher. Meltwater flows in narrow channels, carrying thin layers of sediment. Each stream heads toward a deeper basin, shaped by repeated cycles of heat and cold. And the activity intensifies the closer you get to the central fumaroles. Heat pushes upward with incredible force. Clouds of vapor rise and reform in slow intervals. Pools of liquid mud respond to the thermal pressure with a thick rolling motion. Gas escapes through cracks that widen and close as temperatures shift. Researchers have placed instruments here, and the readings are staggering. Temperatures at the source often exceed 500 degrees Celsius. The surrounding ice remains in place only because of constant replenishment from higher ridges. This is a place where two systems are interacting in real time. Ice moves downward through channels carved by previous seasons. Thermal energy reshapes the ground directly beneath it. The meeting point creates a landscape marked by wild color variations, abrupt temperature shifts, and surfaces that can change without warning. Snow can evaporate within seconds when it reaches the hotter zones. Stable paths exist, but they require careful observation. New vents can open during active periods, turning safe ground into dangerous territory in a matter of hours. Closer to the crater rim, steam forms thick columns that reduce visibility. The sound of gas release becomes sharper, accompanied by a low vibration from circulating water deep underground. The edge of the crater widens into a field of vents, each producing its own pattern of pressure and heat. Thin yellow layers of sulfur settle on nearby rocks. It's beautiful, it's terrifying, and it reminds you once again that this land operates on its own terms. Just beyond MUTNOVSKY, the terrain settles into a different state of activity. The steam thins. The ground opens toward another volcanic structure. This one is called GORELY volcano. GORELY's summit holds a series of overlapping craters, each one formed through repeated cycles of collapse and eruption. And one of these craters contains something truly remarkable: a lake. But this isn't your typical mountain lake. The water fills the basin completely, resting far below the rim in a confined space surrounded by steep rock walls. And the color? A vibrant, almost unreal turquoise. That striking color comes from a high concentration of dissolved minerals and acidic compounds released through ongoing volcanic activity below. Along the inner rim, narrow vents continue to release gas at irregular intervals. The movement is slow and measured, spreading thin layers of vapor across the surface before dispersing upward. Nothing around the crater suggests rapid motion. The lake holds its level. The walls remain fixed. The gases rise and clear. From the rim, the scene feels frozen in time, allowing your eyes to rest on that impossibly blue surface and the processes continuing silently beneath it. It's moments like this that remind you why Kamchatka is so special. This isn't a theme park. This isn't carefully managed wilderness. This is nature in its purest, most untouched form. As we continue our journey, we come across something that feels almost out of place in this volcanic landscape: the steady rush of falling water. This is SPOKOINY waterfall. The name comes from the Russian word for calm, and it fits. Not because the surroundings are peaceful, but because the waterfall itself flows with such consistent, steady force. The stream gathers strength from meltwater channels before dropping straight down, about 16 meters over a basalt ledge. The curtain of white water contrasts sharply with the surrounding terrain, which still holds traces of older eruptions in the form of dark rock and loose ash. Close to the base, moisture from the continuous spray has created a patch of bright green grass. It's a small oasis in an otherwise harsh environment. The water originates in higher catchments, where the ground shifts between hardened lava and soft sediment. These variations guide the stream into a narrow path before directing it over the cliff. The area around the plunge pool stays cooler than the exposed slopes, creating small pockets of vegetation. The sound of water hitting rock keeps a stable rhythm, marking a brief change in pace before the landscape returns to its volcanic character. It's a reminder that even in a place as extreme as Kamchatka, life finds a way. Water carves its path, plants take root, and the cycle continues. Now we arrive at one of the most important places in all of Kamchatka, a place that answers our opening question about where humans no longer sit at the top of the food chain. KURIL Lake. This is the second largest freshwater lake in Kamchatka, and during the summer months, it becomes the stage for one of nature's greatest gatherings. A steady ripple on the waterline marks the moment when the first bear enters the shallows. Then another shape appears, and another. More bears gather along the same stretch of shoreline, and the rhythm repeats every summer without fail. At the peak of the season, you can see well over 20 bears within a single field of view. 20 individual bears, all fishing in the same area, all focused on the same goal. Salmon. The bears arrive when the first strong pulse of salmon enters the lake in early summer. Routes from surrounding valleys guide them toward the shoreline. As new arrivals take up positions, the gathering grows larger. Daily movement follows a clear pattern. Bears shift toward deeper pockets of water, rest on gravel bars, and return to the same locations as the current changes. Cubs stay close to their mothers, watching every movement, learning where the fish gather and how to catch them without disrupting the other bears. They hunt continuously, they eat continuously, and they need to. These bears are building up fat reserves that will carry them through the long winter hibernation ahead. The salmon provide a dense source of energy, and the bears make full use of every moment while the migration remains strong. As the feeding cycle continues, trails of disturbed sediment settle after each pass through the shallows. Water levels shift with the tides and currents, and the bears redistribute themselves around new pockets of activity. This is their world, not ours. We are observers here, nothing more. So where do all these salmon come from? And why do they return here every year? Let's follow them back to the beginning. A wide expanse of moving water marks the start of the migration. The Sea of Okhotsk supports dense concentrations of plankton and small fish. These rich feeding grounds attract orcas and grey whales that follow predictable routes along the coast, and they also sustain the early life stages of salmon. When water temperatures stabilize in early summer, the first groups begin their journey. They leave the ocean and head toward fresh water, driven by an ancient biological command. Return to the place where you were born. Spawn. Complete the cycle. The upstream movement is essential. The gravel beds in these rivers provide the precise flow, oxygen levels, and substrate needed for successful spawning. Without these specific conditions, the eggs won't survive. As the run strengthens, the river fills with continuous motion. Fish push against the current in short bursts, regroup in slower sections, and advance again. Their bodies change color as they shift fully into spawning mode. Once the females reach suitable gravel beds, they clear shallow depressions and deposit their eggs. Males hold position beside them for a brief window, and then, shortly after spawning, both weaken. The final stage of the cycle ends, and their bodies settle along the margins of the river. But here's the remarkable part. Those remains become an essential nutrient source for the entire ecosystem. Bears feed on the carcasses that accumulate in clusters. Birds and smaller predators pick at the exposed sections where the current slows. Decomposition releases material that settles into the sediment and enters the roots of nearby vegetation. The salmon don't just feed the bears. They feed the entire forest. They feed the land itself. It's a perfect circle, repeated every year for thousands of years. A place where the Earth's inner heat breaks through the surface in spectacular fashion. The Valley of Geysers. Steam rises through small breaks in the surface, giving you an early warning of the heat stored below. Molten rock near the upper crust warms the groundwater and drives the activity that shapes this valley. The area includes 25 major geysers and about 175 smaller vents, each releasing water and steam in regular cycles. Moist ground around the vents supports narrow bands of colorful microbial mats and mosses. These organisms create recognizable color zones along the runoff paths, painting the landscape in shades of orange, green, and yellow. But the valley also carries visible scars from more recent events. In 2007, a major landslide tore down the slope at speeds reaching 22 to 25 miles per hour. It removed vegetation and carried mud, snow, and rock toward the river corridor. The debris created a temporary dam that flooded several well-known features, including thermal terraces, waterfalls, and multiple geysers. Thick layers of sediment redistributed the flow of hot water and changed the pattern of steam emerging across the lower terraces. Some geysers went silent. Others appeared for the first time. Recovery has unfolded in stages. 6 years after the initial slide, the water level dropped and revealed vents that had been buried under flood deposits. In 2014, another slide sent material through the river channel. The surge damaged the natural dam, drained the lake, and exposed additional features. New geysers have emerged. Old ones have resumed activity. The landscape is still reorganizing, still adjusting to the changes brought by those catastrophic events. It's a powerful reminder that in Kamchatka, nothing is permanent. The land is always moving, always changing, always being reborn. Not far from the Valley of Geysers, we enter another remarkable geological feature, a wide depression bordered by fractured ridge lines. This is UZON caldera. The basin spans roughly 6 miles across, formed by older volcanic activity that emptied the magma chamber beneath and caused the surface to collapse. The interior contains a mix of thermal pools, sections of forest, mineral flats, and active vents releasing columns of steam that shift in height, with changes in underground pressure. The geothermal fields show the most visible activity. Boiling mud rises in controlled pulses, forming patterns that change as gas channels reorganize below. Narrow streams carry mineral deposits toward shallow pools, creating raised edges where layers settle over time. What's fascinating is how vegetation has started to reclaim parts of the caldera. Where cooler groundwater reaches the surface, pockets of green appear among the exposed thermal zones. Ash-covered ground has shifted into small grasslands. Shrubs have begun to take hold along the inner slopes. Lakes formed after the collapse maintain stable levels through feeder channels that cross the basin floor. The overlapping layers of water, heat, sediment, and fresh vegetation create a living record of how nature recovers from catastrophic events. UZON caldera is a world within a world, a collapsed landscape that's slowly rebuilding itself, one plant, one pool, one vent at a time. Between the towering volcanic giants of the Central Range lies a high-altitude corridor. This is AVACHA Pass, and it serves as a base camp for travelers moving through this region. The centerpiece here is an unusual rock formation called Camel Mountain. From a distance, Its jagged, double-humped silhouette clearly resembles a camel resting in the snow. It's actually a volcanic extrusion, a plug of hardened magma that was exposed by wind and erosion over thousands of years. But the real stars of this pass aren't the rocks. They're much smaller and much louder. Arctic ground squirrels, locally known as AVACHA. These little creatures are everywhere. Small, golden-furred, and famously bold. They often stand upright on rocks, watching anyone who passes by with what looks like pure curiosity. While humans struggle to keep their footing on the loose scree and cold slopes, these squirrels move with absolute ease. They're the true locals here, perfectly engineered for a landscape that humans can only endure for a few hours at a time. They've adapted to the altitude, the cold, the wind, and the scarcity of food. They hibernate through the brutal winters and emerge in spring ready to make the most of the short growing season. Watching them dart between rocks, you realize something important. This land doesn't belong to us. It belongs to creatures like these, animals that have evolved specifically for this environment. We're just passing through. A stretch of fractured lava fields extends across the lower flank of our next destination. This is Tolbacic volcano, shaped by a series of fissure eruptions that redirected molten rock in long, uneven flows. The ground here has a sharp texture, stones fractured into angular pieces, coated in fine deposits from past eruptions. The visual character shifts quickly as you move across the terrain. Older lava cooled into smooth, dark surfaces. Newer flows formed rough structures with deep cavities and sharp edges. Ash layers create muted color bands across the open field. Sections of scorched soil mark the path of more recent thermal movement. And here's something interesting. This place became a testing site for lunar rover prototypes. Why? Because the uneven ground and low contrast lighting conditions here closely resemble what engineers expected to find on the moon. The varied slopes and fragmented lava made it possible to evaluate traction, sensor accuracy, and equipment durability under genuinely demanding terrain. Those tests left faint traces that are still visible along certain routes. Compressed tracks in the ash, disturbed sediment, small markers placed by researchers. As we continue across the lava plains, something appears on the horizon. Tall, dark silhouettes standing across an open field of ash and compacted sand. This is the dead forest. These are the remnants of a forest buried during the 1975 eruption of Tolbacic. The trunks rise without branches, their surfaces hardened by heat and stripped of color. They form a fixed pattern on the landscape, each one positioned exactly where the living tree once stood before the flow of hot material moved through the valley. The ground carries a muted mix of grey and red tones, left by layers of volcanic deposits. Wind shifts the loose ash into shallow ripples that collect around the bases of the trunks. The stillness here is profound. An entire stretch of forest preserved in its final position, altered in form but still aligned with the slope that shaped its growth. The visual weight comes from the contrast, the intact vertical lines of the trees against the blank space around them. It's a scene that conveys both loss and endurance through its physical structure. The spacing between the trunks shows how the forest once stood. Subtle rises and depressions in the ground follow the direction of the old flow, and the open field extends toward higher volcanic formations, linking this preserved fragment of destruction to the larger landscape shaped by the same catastrophic event. The landscape rises in a steady incline until the ground forms a broad pedestal of dark volcanic material. And above this foundation stands the giant of Kamchatka, Sopka, the highest active volcano in all of Eurasia. Its slopes angle upward in near-perfect symmetry, coated in snow that remains through most of the year. The height and shape allow the summit to dominate every surrounding valley, becoming a fixed reference point for anyone traveling through this region. The scale is hard to comprehend until you see it in person. Small ridges and secondary vents appear as faint markings on the lower slopes, and they're absolutely dwarfed by the main cone. That's when you realize just how massive this structure really is. The surface, near the lower flanks, consists of older lava flows, compacted ash, and long channels carved by meltwater. These features lead the eye upward toward the central cone, where the gradient increases sharply. Occasional activity releases narrow plumes that rise through the cold air before dispersing. It's a visible line drawn between the snowfield and the open sky, a reminder that this mountain is very much alive. Communities that have lived in the surrounding valleys for generations regard Kluchevskaya Sopka as a defining presence. It influences travel routes, seasonal decisions, and the orientation of settlements. Its continuous activity has shaped the distribution of rivers, vegetation, and natural corridors used by wildlife. This is more than just a mountain. It's a central landmark in both the cultural memory and the physical geography of Kamchatka. A giant that has watched over this land for millennia and will continue watching long after we're gone. Our journey now takes us back to the edge, to where the land finally gives way to the ocean. Long stretches of basalt cliffs form the last boundary of Kamchatka before the landscape meets the open Pacific. The rock has been shaped by repeated volcanic events, leaving sharp ridges, broken shelves, and the vertical faces that extend for miles along the waterline. Waves strike these formations in steady intervals, pushing white spray upwards and carving new patterns into the darker surfaces. From above, the coastline shows a continuous sequence of inlets and narrow coves where the ocean concentrates its power. Wind crossing the peninsula accelerates as it reaches the edge, carrying salt and cold air across the cliff tops. The patterns of the waves become clearer from this elevation, revealing the sheer force moving through this section of coast throughout the year. Occasional swells rise high enough to cover entire ledges before retreating into deeper water, leaving thin trails of foam that trace the contours of the shore. And then, cutting through the mist and spray, you see it. A massive bird, wings spread wide, riding the updrafts created by wind colliding with rock. The Steelers sea eagle. This is one of the largest and most powerful eagles in the world. Its flight path follows the natural currents of air rising from the cliffs. From a distance, the bird moves in a controlled arc, tracking fish drawn toward the shallows by shifting ocean currents. The presence of the eagle adds scale to everything around it. When you see how large the bird is, and then realize how small it looks against these cliffs, you begin to understand just how massive this coastline really is. The cliffs eventually lower as the coastline bends toward a more sheltered stretch of water. The sound of breaking waves fades, replaced by slower, calmer movement in a deep inlet ahead. This is RUSSKAYA Bay, and it's home to some of the most intelligent and efficient predators in the ocean. A smooth ripple, a brief distortion of the surface, and then, rising with absolute control, a black dorsal fin. The entrance to RUSSKAYA Bay is narrow, and the inlet stretches inward like a protected corridor of calm water. Even from a distance, you can sense the difference. The enclosure, the stillness, the muted echo of distant surf. RUSSKAYA Bay concentrates life in a way the open coast cannot. Its deep, cold layers hold steady currents that attract some of the region's most efficient hunters. Orcas, Groups of these apex predators work the channel with remarkable precision. Their movement is deliberate, almost measured, as they scan the water for salmon returning from the Pacific or for seals resting on isolated rocks. The social structure becomes easier to observe when the water is quiet. A mature female often leads the group, setting the pace, while younger individuals adjust their spacing behind her. Each rise and fall of a dorsal fin marks a coordinated pattern. This is a family unit, moving as one across a confined stretch of water. Vocalizations bounce through the bay, lingering longer than they would in the open ocean. The inlet acts as a natural amphitheater for sound, allowing the orcas to communicate over greater distances with less effort. The presence of orcas shifts the entire rhythm of the bay. Seabirds lift off earlier than usual. The waterline stays unsettled. Every shape at the surface carries weight, because everyone knows what swims below. As the group travels deeper into the inlet, the last fins sink beneath the surface. Only the faint rings of disturbed water mark their passage. And then, nothing. Just calm water and the knowledge that somewhere beneath, the hunt continues. As the last view of the coast settles into the distance, the peninsula leaves a clear impression. There are still parts of the world that exist without our guidance, places where nature writes the rules and we are simply guests. Kamchatka is one of them, steady, remote, and utterly, magnificently alive.